I'm outside the flat of Alan Taylor, Associate Editor of the Sunday Herald and other things, author, etc. And we're going to be discussing Scottish independence and the print media, mass media, books, poetry, theatre. He's got a great insight into that world and the way it impacts on national identity and the independence movement. I'm in the living room of Alan Taylor, man from Musselburgh like myself, but originally from Musselburgh. In fact, not even Musselburgh, Fisher Row, which is even more specialist. Alan, as most people will know, is the editor of the Scottish Review of Books and an associate editor of the Herald. So I'm going to fire quite a few questions to him, and ones that I've never asked him before. And the first one is, Alan, how are you going to vote next year in the referendum?
Talk about being put on the spot, eh? Well, I would be lying if I said I wasn't going to vote yes.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you possibly a harder question. Why?
Well, actually, it's not a harder question. For me, that's a very simple question. I think if you believe that Scotland is a separate nation, a separate country, then it should be independent. It should run its own affairs. And it's as simple as that. I believe that Scotland is a separate nation, a separate entity, and that it should run its own affairs.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're in a very knowledgeable position in Scotland with your journalism and your editorialism. Why is it that only one newspaper in Scotland, including the Scottish editions of the UK press, actually supports Scottish independence?
Well, I haven't actually ever computed who does what, actually. I certainly know that the Sunday Herald, for which I write, came out in favour of a nationalist government at the last election. And I don't think we've ever said editorially where we stand on the independence question, and I think papers may wait yet until next year before we see what they say about which way they're going to go. But I guess what you're kind of alluding to is the sort of tone of the papers that suggests that the vast majority of them, at least, are completely anti-independence and very much pro the Union. The reason for that are pretty complex, I guess. Some may believe that it's a bad thing, independence, and they're doing it out of complete candour and honesty. Others may do it because their owners suggest that this would be a bad thing and that they are operating from some kind of business diktat. That could be part of it. But others, may just be doing it because, like some members of the population, are frightened.
Mm-hmm. I asked Ken McCaskill this question, and he said simply that the papers don't have indigenous ownership or editorialism.
Well, that is definitely true. The papers don't have indigenous ownership, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that if they were indigenous that they would vote for independence. They might not. Maybe Kenny thinks there's a better chance of that if that were the case. But in general, the people who own newspapers tend to be rather wealthy businessmen or wealthy individuals, and these individuals hate change. They crave the status quo. They want stability, and anything that is going to upset that for them is a danger.
But they hate change, but they love profit, and the tax evading owners of the Scotsmen, for instance, the Barclay brothers, live in Sark and own Sark or something like that, seeing the decline of the Scotsmen.
Well, the Barclay brothers don't own the Scotsman anymore. The Johnson Press own the Scotsman, and they used to be a Scottish-based company, but they're not anymore. But I mean, it's a very complicated business. That newspapers tend, in many respects, to be extraordinarily conservative with a small c, and they are very wary of change. And throughout my time in newspapers, again, it's been very difficult to identify newspapers that would be pro-independence. However, having said that, all the time I was at the Scotsman, where I worked for most of my newspaper life, it was a very pro-devolution paper. Having said which, any analysis of its readership would have suggested that that readership was anti-devolution. So the paper, in a way, was rowing against its own readership. But the paper was pro-devolution because it believed it was the best thing for Scotland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that shows integrity. When you look at some print media, but also the mass media, the BBC in particular, that there seems to be an objectivity and neutrality, but sometimes if you look further, you might hear something on the radio, think this is partisan. Are you aware of that?
Yes. I mean, the interesting thing about the BBC is that in its charter, it's supposed to be objective, that it's supposed to take an even course. Sometimes I think it does that to ludicrous extents on both the anti and pro side, say, of independence. And I guess if you're a very pro-independent person, you begin to identify things that suggest that the BBC, in some of its presenters or some of its programmes, is anti-independence. Now, I haven't measured that, and I think it's a really difficult thing to measure. What I would say about that, though, is that the BBC's the crucial thing is in the BBC's title. It is the British Broadcasting Corporation, and if you speak to people here who work for BBC Scotland and talk about why can't it be better, why can't it be more international and sophisticated in its outlook, and they'll say, well, the programmes that I would like to see actually are on the BBC, but they're not on BBC Scotland. The BBC Scotland makes them and gives them to the rest of the BBC, and BBC Scotland regards itself as a member of the bigger family that is the British Broadcasting Corporation. The trouble is that BBC Scotland's role in that family is extraordinarily limited. It's like some kind of, distant cousin or uncle who's emigrated to a far off land. And I would like to see the BBC and BBC Scotland being, the great flagship broadcasting company that it should be.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we're seeing the beginnings of that in BBC Alba.
Well, that's very interesting actually, as I watch football matches with Gaelic commentary and Rangers playing people like, who was it the other night there? Alloa, some other club. I never ever thought to see Rangers playing on a regular basis, but it was a sort of surreal experience. But I do watch other programmes on BBC Alba, and the quality and the editorial level of them are rather wonderful, and do suggest that if the BBC was running itself here, you have the talent to make fantastic programmes.